Hey, welcome back to the 100 Movements podcast. While we normally do some series, I keep saying this. This is about the third time I've said this. We normally do series, Josh, but the last 3 interviews I've done have been with authors.
Hey,
So we're back. For those of you that
we back.
maybe listen in regularly, or this is your first episode and you don't have any context with 100 Movements podcast, we have a part of the work that we do that is 100 Movements Publishing, where we're publishing authors that are trying to shape the conversation of shifting the tracks of history towards movemental Christianity. And today we get to feature one of those authors that we have published, Josh Benadum. Welcome.
Yeah, man. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So just to set the stage, we're not going to try to summarize Josh's book. You should pick it up. It's called A Life That Leads. Josh should pick it up now and show it. There we go. I feel like the last couple of interviews I've done around books, I either just met Larry that we just produced, or I knew the other guy or a couple of them. But with you, Josh, we have quite a bit of history planning some conferences together.
That's right. Yeah, we've been at it for a few years now.
Yeah, so the microchurch conference, which this will come out after that, has happened. But we're going to just have a conversation about this book because, like I said, you should pick up A Life That Leads by Josh Benadum. But we want to talk about, as we think about movemental Christianity, at some point, we need to talk about leadership in this paradigm. And we have to do it in thoughtful ways. As Alan Hirsch often says, if you don't pay attention to structure will pay attention to you. And I feel like you could, drop in a bunch of different words there. If you don't pay attention to DNA, if you don't pay attention to leadership, these things will pay attention to you, and you will default to the culture that you have imagined or been handed. So anyway, before we get into this conversation, Josh, why don't you just give a bit of context on who you are, your story. Who are you? Where are you? How'd you join Jesus on mission?
That's right. Yeah. So I'm pretty thankful just for the whole story of my life and where God has brought me from. So I had the privilege of growing up in a Christian home. My folks came to faith through a Jesus movement era church in the 1980s, and we moved around a lot growing up. We were in like several different states, lived a number of different places. But then when I was in middle school, my family began the process of moving us overseas to Phnom Penh, Cambodia, where my parents established a mission hospital, and that's still what they do to this day. They've been at it for over 25 years. And so I got this like injection of kind of like radical faith at kind of a young age, even though I myself wasn't totally sure where I stood with Jesus. I had this pretty formative experience of watching my parents who were, they didn't grow up in Christian homes, but they became so convinced that they needed to live on mission that they sold everything. We were fairly wealthy, and they sold everything and moved our family overseas to Phnom Penh, Cambodia. So such a huge part of my story is spending those formative years in Southeast Asia, and that's really still where a lot of my heart is. I love Southeast Asia. I love the Khmer, and so really it was in Cambodia that I think I encountered. I really began to encounter God for myself. But then in addition to that, I think some of even my understanding of the nature of ministry, of what it means to build the kingdom of God, began to get formed through being in Cambodia as well. And just being among the poor, seeing, really seeing leadership and Christlikeness lived out by just ordinary people with almost like no resources to speak of, like no education, no formal Bible training, but yet wildly fruitful, right? That paradigm became rich for me, I think, even as a teenager, trying to figure out what I thought about God and following God. And so then I moved back to the States when I was 18 to go to college. And and then I was actually, as a college student, I was involved in a church of house churches and was a part of like a grassroots house church planting movement that grew up into a much larger church. And then so even that, where when I actually began to follow the Lord myself, my early experience of Christian ministry was ordinary people, students, people in their young career, just telling their friends about Jesus, doing life together, and then discipling each other and helping each other follow God, right? And so even then, that was my basic understanding of Christian leadership, came from just that sort of fundamental interaction. Um, in a lot of ways, like, and I I went to seminary, I pastored in a large church setting, and it's a lot changed, after that. But really, my earliest Christian experience was in what I would call like organic forms of church.
Mm.
And so my wife and I, we've always we've remained passionate about that. We always did it as a part of our ministry previously, even when I was pastoring in a larger church setting. And so what we're doing now is we've actually in the last few years we've moved to Central Florida, and we are fostering a new grassroots house church network here in Orlando. So that's my main ministry. We've been doing that now for a few years, and God has really blessed that. We feel super thankful for how that's going. But then in addition to that, and this is where you and I have a lot of intersection, is I'm also connected to an organization called Brave Future, which networks micro, house, and simple church movements all around the country together, really just to give like a sense of like commonality and fellowship between these groups that might look different and use different language, but hold very, very similar convictions. Mostly in the U.S., but also in other parts of the world as well. So that's where I'm at now. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah, yeah. I think that the phrase that we were using in the last microchurch conference, I mean, it was used before that, but I got a sticker then that just said "pursuing the smaller way,"
Yes.
and
Yeah.
I feel like that's the banner tagline I've been using for everything. Is like, yeah, if you're pursuing the smaller way, like that's where we are. That's the
Yeah.
work that we're doing in this moment, in this cultural moment. So yeah, thanks for that, man. Stories are a gift, so it's good to hear more of what I didn't know.
Yeah.
I actually thought you were born and lived early life over there, so I didn't realize that was like
Yeah.
a later
No.
transition.
No. It was like it was in middle school. Yeah. I mean, crazy time
Yeah,
to move your family overseas, but that's
yeah.
when it happened.
I moved in middle school, but like from South Georgia to North Georgia, so it's very different.
That might have still been an extreme cultural shift. I don't know.
There were some things, yes.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the book, man. I think we read books and we don't get a lot of interactions with the authors, so we have assumptions that we bring to the text. We can talk about the shape of the book in a minute, but let's talk about the why.
Mm.
That's the piece that we don't usually get. We just assume, well, you like leaders and you thought about it, so, and you may write about the. I mean, I've read the book, but I'm just saying, like, what was motivating you to go, I need to put this stuff down in a book somewhere because it matters when we talk about leadership in the smaller way?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think I spent about 10 years coaching and training home group leaders and people who are and just training people who wanted to lead house church communities. And I think over the course of those 10 years, in which I went from being a pretty young man in my early 20s all the way into my 30s, I remember seeing there was a lot of, I mean, obviously there was a lot of really cool things that we saw. There was also a lot of failure, and it's a painful thing. I mean, leadership failure is painful no matter what level it happens at, right? Whether it's the
Yeah.
pastor who's known by thousands, or whether it's the person leading a Bible study. And there's many sources of that failure. There's Satan, there's sin, there's so many other things that are at play. But I think I was really interested in the question of what is the real foundation for leadership, and what are the practices, what are the commitments that can lead to lifelong flourishing leadership. And that was really the original thing that made me start thinking and writing about this. Later, because I started writing this book almost 6 years ago. And then I kind of put it away for a while. And then what happened was just a couple years ago, I actually got to be a delegate at the Lasan Congress in Seoul, South Korea, which, if you're not familiar with that, that was established by Billy Graham and John Stott and others in the 1970s. And it's really the largest. It's probably the largest global gathering of Christians that happens in the world, and the most representative gathering, I guess you could say, people from every country. And so I got to be a delegate there, and one of the gap groups, the so-called gaps in the Great Commission that were going on during the Congress, was on developing leaders of character. And so I got assigned to that group. And so every day at the Congress, I sat with 5 other people, I think from Finland, Hong Kong, from Nigeria, Nepal, and also the United States. And we talked about the leadership crisis in our countries. And one of the things that struck me was that this is not just like an American phenomenon. It really is an international phenomenon. There's a massive leadership crisis, and it has so many different elements to it. It includes the failure of high-profile leaders, but it also includes the dearth of people coming up and stepping up to lead. And there's this well formed sense that our old paradigms for leadership and our pipelines for bringing leaders about are just insufficient. They're just not working the way that they should, and even in the kinds of leaders they produce are often also ill suited to the world as it is today and the needs of the kingdom, right? And so being at the Lausanne Congress really it really lit a fire in me to finish the book, and made me realize that the scope of what I was writing for was much wider than I thought. I got a lot of encouragement from people in Lausanne when beginning to re-engage and work through this process. Joe Handley, who's the leadership catalyst for Lausanne, he wrote the afterword in my book, and so yeah, I think that there's the paradigm of leadership not beginning with a position or a title, but being primarily the overflow of what Jesus is doing in a person's life, and how fundamental Christ-like character development that in a robust sense, right? Not just in his moral qualities, but even in terms of adopting his mission, his humility, his endurance, like all those different aspects of who Jesus is. That's really the core of not only just spiritual growth in general, but that's what makes someone a leader is the extent to which they become like Jesus and then begin to impact others through being like him. And so I think what I wanted to do more than anything was make a deposit in that, in the thinking of other Christians, right? To be able to form a paradigm for leadership that begins not with hierarchy, organizational structures, or specific professionalized roles, that begins with who people are, and then works out from there.
Yeah, that's so good. One of the phrases that I feel like I'm probably murdering because I just keep using it over and over. I didn't make it up. I took it from my buddy Rob, who may have taken it from somewhere else. We don't just need Jesus's message; we need his methods.
That's right.
And it's like this. It's helping me read Scripture different. It's like I'm just looking at it, going, not just what did Jesus say, but like, where did he go? Why did he go there? How long did he stay in that space? Yeah. I mean, all of these questions, like why and how did he do this to be able to catalyze such significant world, 2,000 years later, is like, yeah. I'm not going to keep going on about that, but it matters.
That's great. Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, so I had all these questions, and I'm just going to state a couple of things, and then I'm going to walk away from these notes because I just want to have a different conversation with you. The book is based in 3 parts: forming a life that leads, practicing a life that leads, and then sustaining a life that leads. I'm just going to do my own promo of the book because I read it and I enjoyed it and it was helpful for where we are. And so, like, just for those of you listening, so that Josh doesn't have to tell you about his own book, like, it's really important to see the flow of that and to know, like, it's written in such a way to understand the formation, that it doesn't stay ethereal, but there's practices involved that are also supportive of that formation. And then that final third is around like, this isn't just a one-off, but like, what does it mean to sustain this throughout your life?
Hmm.
So I'm just gonna say, hey, pick up the book because Josh knows what he's talking about. All right, there. Man, talk to me about here's my assumption. Let me just state the assumption. The book for you is not, hey, these are thoughts I've had, but it's like a lived experience. Even though you could go like, oh, I'm gonna go to Amazon and Google this, or I'm actually going to go physically to a store and pick up this book. I'm going to find it in the quote unquote Christian leadership section. Um, and
Me
people
and
write books on that.
yeah.
And, and they write books on it and may not necessarily be actually doing it. So I just personally want to hear like how you're embodying it locally, how it's actually forming leaders, how it's informing the Acacia House Church Network.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying our best to approach leadership as something you live into. Not something. I mean, it's not that there aren't roles, right? And in any organization, having roles makes sense. Like, I technically have the role of being a network pastor, for our house church network. But that's not the substance of my leadership, right? It's a context. It's a context in which I lead, but that's not the substance or even the fount of that leadership. And so we're really doing our best to instill that in the very beginning stages of discipleship with people, right? We're a church that's very focused on reaching unchurched people. We've kind of deliberately structured ourselves and placed ourselves to be even somewhat unappealing to church background people. And I could go into how we do that and why, but the main idea is that we want to have proximity to people who don't know Christ and who really wouldn't go to church under other conditions, right? And there's a difficulty to that, right? People come to the church with all sorts of problems, and we feel good about that, right? Because that's we look at Jesus's band of disciples. We look at I just taught Luke 5 at a house church meeting this week, and you look at the tax collectors, the lepers, the paralytic, the fishermen. I mean, it's an eclectic bunch, right? And they've got a lot of issues, but helping people first know the love of God for them, to come to faith in Him in the first place, but then from there to begin to understand and see the ways that God wants to change their lives, right? And bless them, like richly bless them as they not as they just live up to some sort of cultural expectation or some standard of church behavior, but really as they begin to become like the person who saved them, right? To love Him, to know Him more, and to become like Him. And so we're doing our best to not only give people that foundation, but then as they do change, right, to then help them see the way that those changes naturally ought to flow into the lives of the people around them, right? I mean, a real basic example of this is to become someone who's able to forgive, right? Someone who can forgive, and to forgive means that it's a relational exercise, right? You forgive another person, and now whether they receive it or understand it or not, that's a loving motion that you make towards another, right? And so what does it look like to receive that from Jesus, but then to move with it into the lives of other people? And we could go through all the different aspects of who Jesus is, and then not only how people then experience those things, but then also how they flow them out or pass them on into the lives of others. And I think in its most intentional form, we'd probably talk to people about personal disciple making. Not only themselves learning from others, but then doing all they can to then, both through how they live and what they know, pass that on to someone else intentionally so they can do the same for someone else. That's 1 Timothy 2:2. It's that idea lived out in community. But I think by putting that as an expectation and not making it like service and spiritual growth, or like leadership and your personal spirituality, like rather than making these things bifurcated, we're really trying to help people see them as an interconnected way of living. And so that's I would say that that's one of the main things that animates us as we're trying to go about our ministry.
Yeah, so good. Um, I'm just thinking about my first reaction in reading it. Was for Kansas City Underground, also a network of micro churches, smaller way. Like thinking about how this will impact the way we raise up ordinary people. I think we do a great job. That sounds arrogant. Of like looking at normal people and going, Jesus called you to be a disciple maker. And that's true. That's what he called us to do. And as I read it though, there was a sense of like, but in the movement of the gospel in the New Testament, as we see the church beginning to expand, it's not a hierarchical role, it's a relational role, but there are
Hmm.
elders. There
Yes,
are people that move into these roles as spiritual grandparents that we would go, like, your context has shifted now. Like, not only have you raised kids, but now you're helping raise the grandkids and the great
that's right.
grandkids.
Hmm.
And there's a relational authority that comes with that is not just given to you because you got old.
Yeah,
Yeah,
or
but
completed a
but
program.
because but because we always say it's like the people that should be elders and appointed as elders are the people that are elding. They're
Yeah,
already
right,
doing it to some degree.
right.
But what's helpful is to resource them with practices that do help continue that formation, but
Yeah,
also create the meaningful sustainability behind it.
my
I
and my.
again,
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just say personally, that's what like impacted me as I read it. So go ahead.
No, that's cool. I mean, and that's encouraging to me too. I think, I mean, in my previous church network, we used to say that we don't raise up leaders, we recognize them,
Mm,
and that is really a similar idea where leadership is not spiritual leadership isn't really something we can confer. Like that's something which is like conferred by God through organic spiritual influence, right? That comes
yeah,
through being full of the Holy Spirit. That comes through living a transformed life. And so occasionally we will recognize that and ask someone to keep doing that in a certain capacity, right?
mm,
Um, but that's not the bestowing of leadership. It's just the recognizing and it's just the recognizing of it and then applying it to a context. And so yeah,
yeah,
I love that, man. And I think one of the great advantages of us thinking that way about leadership is it allows us to develop people for leadership in a multitude of contexts, right? Rather than thinking in like rigid organizational terms of like we need this kind of leader, right? This kind of person to fill this kind of
yeah,
role. We can think much more broadly, right? We can recognize that people might have that kind of influence in different settings and different spheres. And then also, I think it makes character a lot more practical too, because it's one thing like the whole middle section of my book, like you said, is a list of practices that can help us develop. And so those practices, I literally took character qualities from Titus and First Timothy, and I tried to and I endeavored to show, like, hey, listen, if someone really is embodying this quality in the way of Jesus, here's the impact it's going to have, right?
yeah.
And one of my favorite ones from that list is the quality of hospitality.
Hmm.
And I like that one because I think that we have this really superficial view sometimes of what hospitality is. We think of hospitality as, and again, I'm not saying this is a bad thing. This is an element of hospitality, but I think of like my grandmother, right? Nancy Winter West with her apple pie, perfect, perfect home, smells great, like all those things, and that is, that kind of environmental. Um, creating a warm and welcoming environment, that is an aspect of hospitality, but the actual word in scripture means to be someone who loves the stranger.
Yeah.
So biblical hospitality is not just about being warm and welcoming or a good host. It's really about a lifestyle of outreach, a lifestyle of welcoming others into your life who otherwise would be strangers, right? Of forming new relationships. And so, you think about, okay, what does it look like then for a person who's now a follower of Jesus to become a hospitable person?
Mm,
Um, and it's not as simple as just being a good cook and having people over for dinner. It's although those things are great,
Yeah.
it's attitudinal, and it really is going to
Hmm.
show itself in a person's willingness to engage new people, right? To open up their lives to others. And then then you can extrapolate it further and say, okay, so then what's leadership in the context of hospitality? Well, it means that you've formed, you've made many strangers friends, and now those friends themselves are learning to welcome other people into their lives because of the love of
Yeah.
Jesus, right? Um,
Yeah.
or maybe you've lived this way so consistently that you've been able to gather people now. Maybe your home has now become a hub, right?
Hmm.
For people gathering to build each other up and to walk together closer with Christ. But that's hospitality extended, right? That's hospitality evolved and metastasized, I guess. I don't know, it's a negative term, but like that's what that quality looks like as we continue to cultivate it in the way of Christ over the course of our lives.
Yeah, and again, I hear the deep value for us in this paradigm. Again, as we think movemental Christianity is not hierarchical. Like the book is not, hey, here's how you form a pastoral team. This is like equipping all of God's people to understand everybody can embody this. You could step
we
into
need we
leadership.
need them to.
That's what we need. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
In fact, we need to like dismantle that, um, false dichotomy of the clergy and the laity and
that's
understand,
right.
like, again, the more we empower and everyone understands their role as leaders, like, man, that Titus and Second Timothy passages, like for our network, as we work with microchurch leaders, disciple makers, we're like, when you read this, I wish I had my Bible. I'm like, this is not for a select group of people. We should all be striving for this. You know?
Yeah,
um, like lean into what Paul is writing here and go, yeah, I want to align my life to this. In fact, we do have like a commitment we invite people to sign. That's like, I identify as a disciple maker with the Kansas City Underground,
mm,
and like one of the next lines is, I will strive to live by the what Paul lays out in Titus and Second Timothy. It's like, this
that's
is
awesome.
expectation, not for a select group of people to hold this. Um,
No, it's
all
a
right, man.
vision of Christian maturity.
Yeah, yeah. I Timing. I'm gonna pull you into some stories real quick,
Okay, okay.
because I'm a big fan of stories. So again, I'm just gonna ramble for a minute while you think of like, man, tell me a story of how you have like used these principles. Or again, my expectation and what I felt was like, I'm not just writing ethereal things because somebody taught me about leadership, but like I have images of people in my mind that I've either taught these practices, watched them sustain,
Yeah,
seen their
right.
formation. Um, but yeah, I'd love a story or two that's like, hey, give us a picture of how you have paid attention to this in your own network, how you've watched somebody, like, you're not the only leader in your network.
Hmm.
Yeah. So what's been painful, what's been beautiful, you can go either one of those stories or
Man, I
either one of
mean,
those lines as you tell a story, or both of them.
yeah, what's been painful and what's been beautiful. Yeah, I won't lie. There's definitely been a lot of pain um, over the years, and I actually think that that's like, I know a lot of people listening to this, or people in like the micro or house church space. A lot of people have only been at this often since COVID, right? And I do think that's actually another burden that I have is to kind of, in the context of the movement, right? In the context of the microchurch and house church movement, the burgeoning movement around the country. I think I do have a burden to equip people for sustainability, right? Because the truth is that leadership is very hard. I mean, serving God is very difficult. I mean, it's the way of the cross. There's suffering involved, and and it's really like if we fail to, if at some point we stagnate or we stop growing, if we stop this process of becoming more like Jesus, then we will be ill suited to continuance, right? You know, there's going to be
Mm.
breakdown that occurs, and so sometimes there'll be breakdown no matter what, but there will be breakdown that occurs, and so I mean, there's definitely been a lot of pain. I feel like I was told this by the guy who discipled me, and it's definitely true. Where he was like, you know, the thing. I mean, this may sound like a negative statement, but but I've seen it to be true. He says, you know, the thing that kills someone is almost always the thing that looking back you knew always would.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's kind of true. You know, you look back, you often see when you do see these examples of leaders who spin out. And again, and I mean leaders in any context, right? You know, house church, micro church, anything. When you see leaders who spin out in various ways, oftentimes if you look back at you know who they were in the beginning, kind of who they became over time, a lot of times it's sometimes, you know, there's the emergence of something that wasn't there before, but usually there is this neglected part of who we are that becomes a vulnerability. And I think that the evil one exploits that. Our You know, we can grow in other areas of life, but if we don't hand our whole selves over to God continually, then oftentimes, you know, the flesh takes new ground and or retakes ground that had been previously handed over. And so I've definitely seen I've seen plenty of failure, and I've been on the verge of it myself because people wouldn't face um they wouldn't face the thing that they needed to face to
Mm.
keep going, you know. And like, I mean, I just as an example of this, I think in the book I talk about, I have a chapter about being gentle,
Mm.
and biblical gentleness is actually not it's not just like a soft like or kind affect, right? It's not just like a tonal thing, but gentleness actually has to do with discernment. It has to do with being able to not see things in black and white terms. um and you know, and not being all or nothing, being able to recognize like recognize that, you know, that situations are different, people are different, and whatnot. And one thing that I've seen over time happen with a lot of leaders, especially long-term leaders, is they kind of have all these formative experiences, and then they allow those formative experiences to become the grid through which they understand all future
Mm.
ministry and all future situations. And really that can become a subtle basis for pride, right? Thinking that like you've seen it all, that you know the way people are, what happens, and that can become an excuse for cynicism, or it can become an excuse for treating people more out of your own kind of preferences and experiences rather than really seeking the wisdom of God to love the new person, or the new,
Mhm.
or to meet the new situation that He's putting into your life. Um, and so yeah, I mean, that's not like a particular story, but but it's something I've seen happen again and again.
Yeah.
And so, and it's an example of where I think that if we take this call to Christ likeness seriously, and if we see it as like the continual goal and project of our lives, then we have a chance at avoiding, you know, some of those pitfalls.
Yeah.
Um, so that'd be like a negative. That'd be more of like a negative take, I guess, a pain.
Mhm.
But I do think that there's so much joy too. Um, I've got several friends who just come from, you know, backgrounds where they have had like severe they've had severe mental health issues, um, and and some of those mental health issues have created vulnerabilities in their life, right? Where
Mm.
they're prone, you know, they're prone to anxiety, they're prone to depression. In some cases, you know, maybe there's an OCD diagnosis that remains like a vulnerability in their relationships and their walk with God. Um, but man, to see the way, because God often, you know, when we have something like that in our lives, God often doesn't fully take it away, right? Sometimes it remains that thorn
Mhm.
in the flesh that we continue to have to deal with. But to see the way that even the pain point, right? Even that thing that was like handed to us through the brokenness of the world, like almost becomes like a strength, like it gets like inverted into something that God uses,
Yeah.
is really powerful, man. I mean, like it brings me so much joy to see people conquer, not necessarily by you know, by these weaknesses being eradicated, but by these weaknesses becoming a source of humility and strength. And in a lot of ways, I think that's the thing that ends up pointing people to Jesus and not to ourselves, right? Because people
Yeah.
realize, oh, you're actually still prone to all these issues. Like you actually still have this like debilitating problem in your life, but it's made you humble and reliant. Maybe you're more prone, you're less prone to just go through your own natural inclinations, and you seek God more carefully because you know that you have this thing. And that's weakness that becomes strength, right? And people can
Yeah.
see like the fingerprints of God. And so I've got a few examples like that, just people who are strong leaders in our context, who I think in a lot of other settings would never have been looked to for that, because of their
Mm.
problems, or because of, or maybe just because
Yeah.
of the environmental barriers between them and any kind of organizational leadership. But in our context, they are fruitful, flourishing Christian leaders, and I just feel so proud of that.
Yeah, so good, man. I'm actually thankful that you didn't get specific. I meant to give the caveat of like, don't name names. People are people,
Yeah,
they're not projects, and we
right.
don't want
Of
to
course.
exploit that. So I actually
Yeah.
appreciated the way that you handled both of those. So hey man, thanks for taking time. Um, Again, if you didn't hear us at the front, the book is called A Life That Leads. I turned my head because I had a brain freeze there for a second. I was like, oh, say it right. Um, when does it fully release, Josh?
So March 12th. So the microchurch conference is March 12th to the
Oh,
14th in Tampa, and the book actually launches the first day of the microchurch conference. So
all right.
that's
So
it.
this we will have recorded so you can get it.
It's
It'll
live.
come out after that. So pick it up, encourage you to read it, and consider, what does it mean for your community? What does it mean for your network? What does it just mean for you? What does it look like to join Jesus in being formed in his ways and leading in his ways? Thanks, man.
Great being here.